You are listening to Stepping from Stone to Stone, a podcast devoted to discussing combat silat, also known as Pencak Silat Pertempuran, as well as the underlying themes, principles, and concepts behind all combat. Welcome to another episode of Stepping from Stone to Stone. Well, hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Stepping from Stone to Stone. This is the first in our interview series. I'm going to be interviewing Bill Dwyer tonight. Dwyer is, I guess, at this point, the second highest ranked person in PSP.
Yeah, Pengajar, whatever.
Oh, Pengajar, yeah, sorry. English
no, it's not, I don't care about that.
Yeah. Well, that kind of touches on a little bit of the culture of PSP. Nobody seems to give a crap about the titles. So, it's just getting beat on the floor.
It's just access to information, you know? That's what we get, and that's what we're after.
Well, and I think, after talking with you, that it's also trips to the emergency room and dental work.
Yeah, it is. Sometimes the emergency room, sometimes not, because in my history with PSP, I have multiple broken toes. I think I broke my foot one time. That one went to the ER, but you can't do anything for a broken toe except for tape it to the next one and take some Motrin. And I've got a couple chipped teeth that I refuse to get fixed every time I go to the dentist because they remind me that when I zigged, I should have zagged. So, it's just kind of like a mnemonic device, a mental touchstone to my evolution in PSP.
Well, and it can also turn into a second career, doubling for like Shark Week or something if the whole PSP and educator thing doesn't work out.
Correct. Love me some Shark Week.
So, Bill, I wanted to go a little bit over your background. So you've been in martial arts for a while?
Yeah. If we want to talk about the whole trajectory of my resume, I started in martial arts. I had always been interested in it. Since I was a kid. I can remember, I think, my first martial arts movie, because back when I was a kid, you would have on Saturdays, on any given channel, you would have a Saturday Kung Fu Black Belt Theater kind of thing. And I remember seeing two specific films back-to-back on the same day. It was like a double feature, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was about 8 or 9, and it was Gordon Liu in Master Killer, or what's called the 36th Chamber of Shaolin, and then Bruce Lee's Game of Death. So I immediately, that day, was transfixed in front of the TV and figured out I want to move like those people. And this was kind of before like the wire work was going on in Hong Kong and whatnot. So this was kind of, they were moving to their own ability, and I was fascinated. And I kind of pushed my parents more and more to say, that's what I want to do and that's what I want to be. So that kind of lit the bug for me, and I remember my parents doing some tentative forays to support me, but I kind of lost interest early on. I did some Shotokan. Karate was my first foray into that, and once I got my yellow belt, I didn't understand why I was doing kata and how it applied to helping me defend myself. So, and then it didn't help that I got... on my off time, I got thrown from a horse during that time and broke my arm, so it kind of sidelined me for a while. And then I took a hiatus, and I didn't pick it up until I was like 16, because from that Shotokan experience, I didn't feel that was the right expression for me. Nothing wrong with Shotokan. All expression is good expression, but that just wasn't my expression. And even though that kind of stuff was available to me around, as I moved around as a kid, because we moved around multiple times, chasing finances and the dollar and gainful employment for my father and my mother, that I really held out for Kung Fu. And then when I was about 16, 17, I was on, in the coastal South Carolina, and a Jeet Kune Do Kung Fu school kind of opened up. That it had Jeet Kune Do, but then was also like a back door. You had some animal forms to it, but it was a big focus on Wing Chun, boxing, heavy on the boxing, and that's when I first got introduced to Kali La Costa blend. And so I pursued that pretty heavily throughout my high school for about 2 years. And then college came around, and I had to move out of town, which was a change. Thankfully, I got exposed to the college town, which was about 2 to 3 hours away, Columbia, South Carolina, to a Hungar school, which was very traditional, very heavy on stance work and whatnot. It was kind of those old, you're going to stay in that stance for an hour and 45 minutes, and you're going to be shaking and wobbling and all that stuff. But the attention to detail was pretty good. So I stayed there for a little bit. And then I moved back to my home of origin and picked up JKD again for a good while. And ironically, I think I got introduced to Mafalindo Silat out there by a visiting instructor from the Innocento Academy, and just pulled my instructor and his teacher for a quick closed-door seminar, and I was fascinated by it. And it was like watching, trigonometry when you've been doing simple two-digit addition. You know what I mean? So after that, I wandered around. I did some Choi La Foot, did some more Wing Chun, and then I entered the service, where I was exposed to Serrata Eskrima, which kind of fascinated me because it was very fast, and I felt that it was very combat effective. And so I was still evolving, I guess, as a martial artist, but I couldn't let go of the Kung Fu too easily. So after leaving the service, I went into returned to coastal South Carolina, where I found a Wing Chun school, which I thought, well, I've got familiarity with it. I'd like to study, see what happens. Well, that Wing Chun school had then transformed into a Kali school, Pakita Tersha Kali, Bill McGrath lineage under Grand Tuhan Leo Gahe. So, and I was just blown away by its combat effectiveness, its no-frills approach, even though there was some artistic elements to it and its attention to detail. So I studied that pretty hard for the next 8 years and whatnot. So, I really loved it. I didn't think anybody could beat it because it was beautiful, it was hypnotic, but it was also brutal and lethal, and I felt very confident in protecting myself using that. And then I relocated to Florida shortly after I got married, and just had to keep training by myself, doing distance training, like going back and forth with seminars, me in the backyard hitting tires, posts, whatever I could hit with a rattan stick. And then there is the Sayok family had been in my area of Florida for a long time, and it was Mike Sayok. This is Chris's little brother, Tuhan Chris Sayok's younger brother. I think he's an Ama Guru. But he opened a school, and I walked right in, and I felt very confident because there was some cross-pollination in the early to mid-'70s between Balthasar Sayok and Grand Tuhan Leo Gahe, so I felt that there was some good synonymy because I was still trying to maintain my Pakita Tersha because I had invested so much time in it. But then this 6-foot-plus tall guy walks in after a month where I thought I was the top stick, and this guy starts beating me up over the next couple months with little to no effort. And that would be my first introduction to Guru. Because I remember any chance that we had for about 2 months, he and I would pair up when we were supposed to, break out into small group and practice and whatnot after we've been shown that whole group stuff, that we would immediately, if we could, go off whatever training paradigm that we were supposed to be doing, be it a drill, be it whatever, and try to beat the snot out of each other because it was fun and because he challenged me, and I think at least I was not the easiest person to beat. I don't think I really challenged him in those early days at all. But he enjoyed it, and he enjoyed, I guess, me coming back after I got, my eyes crossed after he hit me like a freight train. So after training with him for a couple months, I was still doggedly hanging on to my advancement Pakiti Tersha. And so what sealed the deal for me is the fact that he kept beating me up or successfully, like 90% of the time out of every exchange, he was housing me. And I couldn't figure out why, because I thought he was doing Kali. And I finally said, "What are you doing?" And he said, well, this is Silat. This is one of the many things of Silat, and that's what I teach. And I was like, okay. And I'd heard of Silat, and it had always been in my experience in talking to the senior guys in Kali, Eskrima, Arnis, that Silat was always a capstone study that you would go through any type of like Filipino martial arts system, and then you would go study Silat. It was the capstone. It was what you did after that. So I was like, okay, well, when I finish Kali, I want to come training with you. And then I went up to a seminar, one of my distance training, and I was very close to instructorship, apprentice instructor, like Khan Guru, Isa. And I could pretty much do a lot of things, but I was tested in this one particular element that would have advanced me to where I wanted to go. And it's he's like up in the echelon of Paquita Tertia under Bill McGrath right now, and he asked me to go out of sequence, and I couldn't do it. So that really alarmed me, and I got really, really upset, and maybe even a little disenchanted with what I was doing. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying anything about Paquita Tertia. I love it. I still do it from time to time just to practice the movement and flow. But how I was learning it or how I was choosing to learn it, I could not apply it out of sequence. So I immediately came back down to Florida, where Guru Stark was, and I said, all right, I need to do what you do because you can effortlessly beat me regardless of what I throw at you. So that was that, and then we started. That was roughly, I think, 2003, 2004. In fact, you actually started before me. So, chronologically, we're the same generations as brothers in Silat. So,
yeah, one of us put in a little bit more time and effort, and I think that one's, the one with the fancy title.
Well, I really didn't have much of a choice for those first 3 years because Guru lived like 2 blocks down from me. In East Central Florida here, and where he would come knock on my door on his way to where we would train, and really didn't give me a choice, So and then I it was fun. So I was like, yeah, I'm coming. So
he was going to be 10 to 15 minutes late anyway. So
yeah, Tuesdays and Saturdays were always locked in. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Those were some fun times with some of the early stuff and the early Keloargas. I think that's actually where I met you, was the second Keloarga. For those that are just started listening recently, Keloarga is kind of our system-wide gathering that happens, at this point once a decade or so. Right. But used to be a yearly thing.
We're turning that around.
Yeah. Well, no, things have been cooking, so I'm happy with the direction things are taking and the increased productivity that's coming with it. So.
Right. Right.
But yeah, that's where I met you, and that was an interesting time.
It was pretty different. At that time, I'd been rarely exposed to Silat. I've read about it. I've seen a little bit about it, but it was still a big question mark. It was this mysterious, system or multiples of systems that were both artistic at one time and also incredibly effective, bordering on brutal. And it was one of the first systems. I've always tried to fight with my form, whether that be kata, forms, and whatnot. And I've never been able to marry the two in whatever I said. Doesn't mean it can't happen. I just never been experienced to it until I ran into PSP, where Guru Stark showed me something, and then he showed me how he's going to whip my behind with it, and then proceeded to whip my behind with it, regardless of what I tried to do.
Oh, you can swear on this. This that gate has been opened quite a while ago.
I hear you.
So, I wanted to touch on a couple of other things too. So, that's the martial background, but you work as an educator now.
Yeah.
And Guru and I have talked. I can't remember for the life of me if it's one of the episodes that's been released at this point or not. It will have been released by the time this airs. But about learning how to learn and teaching methodologies.
Right.
Because to me, that's one of the most important things, right? If I teach myself how to be a good student, or I learn how to be a good student, then the whole world opens up to me.
Right.
And you and I were part of what we probably refer to as like 2.0. in Silat that Hugo, another guy that I'm going to be interviewing coming up here, he was part of 1.0. So and now we're to probably 3.1 or 3.2 as
Something
far
like
as
that,
iterations of the
Yeah.
system.
Yep.
One of the things I really appreciate about PSP is it's not a static. This system was perfected 500 years ago. You will not add to or alter it.
Right.
You
So,
may
yeah.
see different stuff session to session.
Yeah, exactly. So, I'm an educator. I've been doing this is my 18th year and whatnot. So, out of a discussion way long time ago when I think it was 2 or 3 years into the system, just a conversation Guru and I had was that him becoming a leader of a system and then also encouraging people to become Pilati and group leaders was that he never really had thought about the fact that outside what we really want to do was just teach Silat is that we have multiple roles that we have to fill. This as and we all have strengths is that we have to be a business. We have to teach people how to run a business, a small business. We have to teach people how to market, and we have to teach people how to teach. Because there are wonderful martial artists out there, incredible fighters that cannot translate that ability into instruction. So I've kind of evolved into the position to talk about instruction because I tend to do it, 40 to 50 hours a week. So,
Whatever deity I might have pissed off to get stuck with the marketing and business development side, if you're listening, I'm sorry.
I know, right?
Let's talk about it.
We're evolving into the elements that we saw it as issues back in the day.
Yeah. Well, and that's conversations I've had with Guru, which are boiled down more or less to this sucks and I hate this about the martial arts industry. Okay, well, what are you doing to fix it? Well, nothing, because screw those guys.
Yeah.
So you can't really bitch if you're not doing anything to fix it. Oh, yes, I can. I can definitely bitch.
Right.
It's just a little hypocritical.
Right.
So, How have you seen the teaching evolve since day one? I mean, I know the organization has definitely changed a little bit.
It has. And what I think, well, I'm probably gonna get a little bit technical, but not to make anybody yawn here real quick, and talk about how the brain learns and learning styles, and then kind of loop it back into what we do that is kind of specific to PSP and makes it a wonderful learning opportunity because we do things inherently. What I'm going to be quoting is kind of some jargon that are out of some two specific individuals. One's Dr. Rick DeFore and the other one's Dr. Robert Marzano, and they're very prominent within the education system right now. So the way that humans learn, how we learn as people, is the brain, it seeks patterns, and the brain seeks novelty. So if you can initially start with those, then you've already hooked somebody. The brain also, when we first are exposed to something, we're only going to remember about 30% of it. And there's science to back it up, and you can look at those two PhD guys because that's most of the information that is guiding a lot of Americans' education in a good way. They're trying to transform the current thing into some valid, reality-based, problem-solving type of education. So 30% of what you're first exposed to is all you're really going to retain. And mentally, behaviorally, the human brain needs about 33 back-to-back experiences to really latch onto something, to really build those neural pathways. And on the flip side, it needs 28 back-to-back experiences to unlearn something from that long-term memory that we retrieve for working memory. So that's kind of a challenge, and learning anything doesn't happen overnight, and learning PSP doesn't happen overnight. I can remember, Guru constantly saying, you got to practice. I don't care if it's 15 minutes a day, you got to practice. So the practice is a huge part of what we do. And in a nutshell, that's how the human brain learns. So teaching-wise, some of the most successful teaching strategies, usually it's traditionally only three. People learn in three ways: visually, auditorially, where they listen, and then body kinesthetically, doing. PSP and martial arts in general are pretty good about that, where they present, they talk, and then they do. And that's just the inherent nature of what we do as martial artists, because there's really no other paradigm. But what I see we do in PSP that is so separated is Guru has from day one introduced what I call a productive struggle. He taught us like the right-handed side of a juru. Everyone, like we do 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, 7, 9, and 11. And then we're required to figure out the left side or the even numbers. That's a productive struggle because he's not spoon-feeding us, but he's requiring us to do some self-learning, some self-development, make mistakes, come to him, and in doing that, we tend to own and master the information that we can talk to it with a degree of certainty. Also, he gives us biofeedback immediately if we are messing up. And you know what I'm talking about. So if I'm not doing a movement correctly, or if you're not doing a movement correctly, it doesn't matter if you're day 1 or day 10,000. If you're not moving right, the biofeedback's coming to tell you you're doing it wrong, and your bell's going to get rung. So I think what really stands us apart is the productive struggle, in that he makes us figure out some stuff, which is very powerful that we don't see in other martial arts systems. I mean, I haven't seen it yet, because it's not easy as a teacher to watch a student struggle, but it's necessary. Because it goes back to that early story of why I kind of joined PSP, is because I thought I was doing something really revolutionary with where I was Kali-wise, but as soon as you take it out of sequence, I was jacked up. I was messed up. And I think that's the beauty of what we do, is we take things and it's principle-based, and we constantly say that. But what does that mean? That means that I can respond to imminent violence, and if I'm dealing with somebody that's not going to go with my drill, I can still impose my will and safely walk away from that situation. That's probably the most powerful piece I can say about the teaching of PSP.
And that touches on some of the stuff that we've also, recorded. Adaptation and recognition being two of the more powerful attributes that you can grow in a practitioner. And that was my experience with some of the other arts that I studied. I was learning stuff that worked great at 0 miles an hour, or with somebody who was cooperating with you or volunteering on the dojo floor.
Yep.
But when I got out, and then people didn't realize they were supposed to hold still long enough for me to kick them in the head.
Right.
Or, hey, this is a one-step response to your haymaker to my face. What I need you to do is hold still long enough for me to punch you twice in the ribs and once in the head.
Yeah, to look all cool and stuff, and hold a pose. It's like one of the, some of the worst martial arts films.
Oh,
stuff like that.
And
posing.
I could never get anybody to choreograph that movement with you, or with me, out of the sad realization that people just didn't want to get hit. They didn't know what their role was in the fight.
Yeah. Well, and it leads back to that earlier podcast. I think it was podcast 2, where, I think it evolved from Guru's experience when he was testing it, that when you have somebody that frequently and willingly, if not flagrantly, will not sit there and take it, will not be the feeder and let you be the hero, but let's see if we can have some mix. That I think that was the spark of what I call the productive struggle, because when we struggle through things, we learn a lot more. The learning curve is much more powerful than being spoon-fed, because you own it. You own the information far more easily that way. You get to mastery faster that way.
That's fascinating to me, because there's a dynamic in a lot of teaching environments I've been in, and it's not just martial arts. We joke in PSP about seeing Silat everywhere. My Silat is my life. But when I look at a lot of the teaching environments I've been in, it's like the teacher's waiting for you to have an issue so they can prove to you how much they know by giving you the ready-made answer.
Exactly.
They short-circuit your process, and looked at from the perspective that you're putting out there, they're freaking hamstringing you. And they're stunning your growth, but everybody knows that they know what they're talking about, and that's important.
It goes versus enabling versus empowering, and as a system, we tend to focus on the empowerment piece. Now, yeah, I could spoon feed you and walk you and give you a crutch, but that's enabling you. That's not making you any more effective out in that intangible combat arena, the street. When rubber hits the road, or whatever you have to say. It's the productive struggle on multiple levels, because we're looking at a couple different things when we talk about Silat and combat in general. We're looking about the physical attributes, but we're also looking at the mental attributes, because internalizing and flipping that switch is kind of a difficult thing for some people. I had the experience. I'm currently teaching micro self-defense seminars to women right now, and they're having a difficulty hitting me in regards to me being the aggressor. And it comes down to that if they don't, I guarantee them, I'm saying, look, you need to hit me, because the feedback is I'm going to touch you, and it's not going to be very pleasant, so you need to struggle through this. So what we need to do is we need to get to that place, that switch. We need to do physical attributes and mental attributes, but you got to struggle with both to actually be successful, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and it's to me, once again, I use the word interesting a lot, because I find myself at a place with the system where I go, that's cool, or I didn't see that before, or I've seen that for 10 years and I didn't know it was organized that way. That's interesting. But a lot of this, the time, just speaking from the student perspective, this whole productive struggle thing sucks. Like, it is a painful process to go through, because it's uncomfortable mentally. You're like, this guy's got the answer. I'm giving him $15-20 a lesson, whatever it is, to give me the freaking answers. He should be coming off some shit right now. Versus, going elsewhere, and you're just like, here. Well, thanks. I didn't grow any, but at least
well, thanks for the black belt.
Yeah.
But what's that going to do for me? Out in a conflict of imminent violence with Badass and his two bigger friends, right?
He's only called Badass because he's the little man in the family, and he has
right.
6'4".
Yeah. Two hairless gorillas behind him. We need to struggle. We need to own it. And you need to be able to work through it, because what's going to happen. And it doesn't matter, it's just going to happen in life. You're going to hit an obstacle. You're going to hit something that doesn't go your way. And you need the skill, both physically and mentally, to negotiate that. Now, PSP-wise, that means you got to be able to negotiate that so you can walk home and go to bed and protect, be there for your loved ones and whatnot. So that's what I was just there with you, man, when I was going through it. I was frustrated as all get out. Most of the time I was frustrated. But we plateau when we train. It's kind of like a staircase. You make this jump, and then you get this acceleration of knowledge and ability, and then you plateau for a while. And that's just the way that the human body, the human brain, the human psyche works. And then you jump again, and you're like, oh my gosh, this makes sense now. And then you plateau for a while. You kind of have to have some stamina, some resilience in it to actually be successful at anything. I remember a really powerful conversation that kind of put my head on a swivel, kind of snapped me into shape, is that I was cruising through the levels, man. You know what I'm saying? I had done Alice, I had done Masukan, the evasions, the entries, and I was working on the catching and whatnot. And I was going from like a test of catching up into getting to the really sexy stuff of PSP, the really thing that made it differential, and you could be artistic with it. So what had happened was I was testing, I think, catching and going up into kunchen, or locking. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I had neglected my entries. I had neglected my Alice for training for that grappling kunchen locking system. And Guru being Guru honed in on it. I mean, I'm testing for it right now. You know what I mean? This is a Saturday testing situation. I'm doing the kunchen, the locking and whatnot. And he goes, whoa. Let's go. Show me your Alice. So I had to show him my alas. And he said, show me your Masakan, your entries. And so I had to show him my entries, which were really neglected and had atrophied. And then he says, well, we need to stop the lesson. We need to stop the test. And I was like, well, what's going on? He goes, well, your entries aren't where they're supposed to be. And without that, you really can't build on the Kun-Chin. So I got really frustrated, and he kind of noticed that. And he said, Bill, what's the ultimate goal here? And I said, I'm sorry? And he goes, say you pass this. Say you pass every test I give you, and I give you an instructor ranks. What are you going to do then? Are you going to quit training? And I really hadn't thought about that. So he then made me, for the next, I think, 3 weeks to a month, rework the levels that I had atrophied or I had let go before I was allowed to test again for that level of information. And I had evidence that I knew my evasions, my entries, my catching, my passing, my trapping, and then I could do my locking. So he kind of instilled in me with that one comment that the productive struggle is very powerful.
Well, and, you know, it's not, at least I don't think it's unique to PSP. I have seen this in other arts, but when you start adding pressure to stuff, you start limiting your amount to BS your way through it.
Exactly.
And every one of the testings I've either had or been party to or seen, the pressure gets ratcheted up, and you don't necessarily have to have an insane level of mastery for what you're testing on. You have to be good at it, but you do have to have a large level of mastery on everything that's come before.
Yeah, in tests post that experience, we go through every different level just to show. And the upper echelons, it's a pretty exhausting day. You need about a good 5 days after to recover, because when you say the pressure, and it's not just evident in testing, it's evident in the class, that we'll work, we'll work the system for a while, we'll work with the instruction of the day, the learning target, the learning goal, and then we'll, just do kind of a bull ring situation where you got one guy versus multiple guys, and to see how you react and see what's going on with your fight or flight, stuff. So that is also, it's not necessarily unique, but there's something in what we do that has got a little bit of not what everybody else has got.
Yeah, well, and that's so one of the reasons that we have this podcast, and it's kind of an offline stated reason, is figuring that out about PSP. Right? Because everybody, like, you talk to anybody in the martial arts, and it's, well, our system's unique. Based on what? Do you grow people extra limbs so they move completely differently than those of us that have, 2 arms and 2 legs? Do you cut limbs off so that they move completely differently than those of us who are able-bodied? No? So what's unique about your system? Everybody says that, right? And, being able to give a concise, in 30 seconds or less, tell me what's unique about your system. And it's like you get gridlock. It's the Three Stooges syndrome. So many words trying to get through the same door. Yeah.
Well, I can share that something happened to me last night was kind of powerful in regards to what you're asking. Is that, as the new year came around and trying my own way to market in my specific area, because everything's different, I've kind of put it out there to specific forums that I follow. And just on a lark, I kind of put it to a wives forum. I said, hey, if you want to get confidence in your self-defense to escape violence, and my wife helped me out with a good bit, and she's kind of like my contact person, because they might not want to talk to me, they want to talk to her more, is that where I'm going through just basic bare bones how we would respond to an attack and then trying to escape. And the comments I've got from the layperson that has no experience whatsoever is, this is so natural, and this makes so much sense. What makes PSP different is that we're not... I can remember my first conversations with Guru Saki. He says, I am not going to make you, or me, who is 6'1", 6'2", I'm not really sure of his measurements, right? A 6'1", 200-pound man, try to fit into the body structure or body movements of a 5'6" to 5'2" Indonesian 125 male. It's just not possible. You know what I mean? So he's kind of really adapting the body culture to something we can do in the West, but also at the same time paying homage to the traditional roots, because Silat in its essence, without getting into too much lineage, is all about making sense and being a natural way of expression. I always kind of, in addition, refer to it as like organized cheating when I'm fighting. It's just like we're not going to worry about strength. We're just going to cheat the whole way so we can get away. So, but those two students had no exposure whatsoever, and they said, this just makes so much sense, and it's such a natural way to move. So I think that's also a separation point for PSP.
Yeah, it definitely is, and I've noticed with myself. I'm 5'10", and now I have a well-developed marriage muscle that I'm currently trying to lose. Puts me about 220 in bare feet. But I am rarely the weakest guy in rooms that I walk into, unless I'm walking into a weightlifting gym or something like that. For me, it was a big struggle to not power my way through techniques. And it wasn't until you start getting into some of the bigger guys in the system. You and I had talked about Hugo before. Hugo is not the weakest person in most of the rooms that he walks into, probably outside of like the local powerlifters convention.
Right.
And definitely not the smallest unless we're talking like NBA team type room.
He's like what would you say, 6'5" plus?
No, 6'7".
6'7", super fast hairless gorilla.
Yeah. Well, when you and I were dealing with him out of town, I think he was right at about 6'7". I think the year that you met him, because I had met him the year before that, and I don't remember if you were at that Keller
I was not. Yeah, I went to the next one.
Yeah, he was like 280, so he was a hairless gorilla that was in decent shape. And then he started to slide into like the 300-ish mark, which is not, it's like, oh, the 20 pounds is not going to slow this guy down at all. Well,
no.
Crap. But yeah, that you're not going to outstrength your way through that. It's just like if I just muscle it enough. No, that's not how this works.
Yeah, and surprisingly, he was also a very what I say, and I mean this in the most, I guess, masculine way. He was a very generous training partner in that if it didn't work for me, like because when I went to Kellawarga with that, I wanted to work with Hugo for a number of reasons, and I know we're kind of getting off track here, so I do apologize.
We meander, that's fine.
Okay, is that I know Hugo was seminal to the development of what we do, and that he was a very strong fighter regardless of what system that you were doing. So I had always put in my mind, and it might have been a suggestion from Guru, I'm not sure, because just the conversations we had, is that if it works versus Hugo, it'll work versus anybody, because Hugo is kind of like your worst case scenario. But in training certain things, for instance, I can remember gununting or scissoring techniques. We were doing elbows. We were just running through the whole stand-up system, and we were doing the elbow. I think it was second day or first day, late first day that we were doing the gununting, and I was popping him right on a nerve cluster on the top of your forearm, just below the elbow. And he was like, "No, doesn't work, not working." So he constantly kept feeding me until he fed it, or until I did it correctly, which was a cool thing, Because here in my mind is some guy that is, a senior to me, but he's making sure I get it right. And that kind of also, talking about the teaching style, I'm trying to loop it back here and bringing it back, is kind of indicative of what we do. It's not about, I make jokes about it when we get together. I'm a senior student, I'm not getting beat up. It's not about that. It's about developing the person that is across from me. And I know that there's a proverb that Guru likes to quote a good bit, in that, like, iron sharpens iron, man sharpens man. It's not about me beating your ass because I'm a senior to you. It's about me developing the person across from me, doing the best I can to make them better. And that's also a unique teaching thing that I know is in PSP, because there's a lot of we always hear, keep your ego at the door. That tends to happen at PSP. Otherwise, your bell gets rung pretty quick.
That's part of the helpful thing.
What's that?
That's part of the helpful thing.
That's part of the helpful thing. That's that biofeedback I was talking about. if you can't leave it at the door, then you're going to be working with Guru, and it's going to be very, very nonchalant, very subtle. But then all of a sudden, you're going to get jacked, and you know your eyes are going to cross. You're going to black out a little bit, but then you'll come back. A little nausea, but you know it's okay. But you know that's with any of us in the scene. You know, you may want to change your relationship, and that's fine. And we even kind of engineer that when we do drills, that we encourage, let's play, because we play Silat, is that we encourage you, go ahead and go off drill. Let's see if I can respond on either side to make sure I still impose my will, which is another unique thing. I can remember one of our members from the early 2000s, Doug Sinaway, if you remember him.
Parting Doug, yes.
He would routinely try to mess with anybody he was feeding just to see what would happen. And I thought at first it was very frustrating as I was going through that. But then I started to like it because it built my confidence, because I knew he was going to go off what he was supposed to do just to mess with me. And then I was able to respond because I knew he was going to go off somewhere. He wasn't going to stick to the drill. It kind of shifted the lens at how I look through things. So again, it goes back to the teaching differences that I've experienced with PSP that may be inherent in other systems, because I don't know. But it also, again, goes back to my big theme of being having a productive struggle in instruction.
Absolutely. Well, you know, that came up in our class this past Monday. You know, usually a couple times per study session, and I don't have the fancy Bahasa titles, so I say I study with or I show people. I don't teach.
Right.
But
right.
You know, so I get the, well, what if I do this? And, you know, it's become a joke. Sure, Precious, you're the first person to think of doing that. Really obvious escape to me. You know, I'm definitely not going to do something horrible back.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, oh, man, I thought that really had you. Yeah, that's... That and, like, the other 4 common variations for escaping out of this have already happened to me well in excess of what I liked. So, here's the 4 counters to that. Well, I didn't even think of 2 of those. Well, now you have. Congratulations.
Yeah. and you know, everybody loves the what if game, and I know, and I operate this way because I learned it at Guru's hands, that you can ask what if all day, but knowledge is very painful. Because if you say what if, then we are going to show you.
Yes.
And not to quash you, but we're going to show you this is what you can do to accommodate your question. So yeah, there's been multiple people that I've trained and that I've been training with under Guru that I said, you know what, ask a question, but I know from experience that the answer will be a painful biofeedback. And not to say that it won't. I want to know sometimes too. But yeah, play the what if game all the time, but knowledge can be painful sometimes.
Well, and that's yeah, that's part of the culture of the art as it's developed, though, because you'll see people and they go through this loop as a student. Oh, that's so easy to get out of. What if I? And then ow, ow, ow. Well, crap. Every time I'm asking what if, I'm getting hurt. So I'm just going to clam up. And then later on I'm not getting as much knowledge as I was. The knowledge is painful and often sucks. Is the knowledge worth the pain? And once they make that determination, it's like this, you know, then they really start to advance. But until that's figured out, it's like,
And it might depend on your training group as well. And I know we're getting really down into it in technical, because for a while there, it was just myself and Guru, and so there was a huge discrepancy in skill. I mean, huge, because you know I'm a baby in Ceylon at this time, early 2000s, and so I'm just getting pounded for months straight, and then his, I guess, reputation gets out. Or just because of the novelty of Ceylon, because it's not very widely known. He was starting to get people from Miami and Tampa and some Jacksonville, and they would come in and he'd say, okay, Bill, fight him. And I'm like, do what? And just simple drills, and not that I am superlative, but just the level of training I was getting, kind of like if you want to get better, you got to fight better people. Mm-hmm. So I was constantly fighting a better person in skill level, and so that when I got these other people who come in where I'm not the same skill level as Guru, I was quite successful because I had to struggle at everything. I had to experiment. I asked questions, I got the painful answers, but then I would experiment in regards to my movement, and sometimes it would work, 9 out of 10 times it wouldn't, but I was encouraged to continue experiment so that when I got to confront or cross hands, as we say, with other people of equal or lesser skill, my reaction time was a little bit faster because I was determined not to get hit again. So, that's kind of interesting too in regards to learning and whatnot. If that's what we're talking about here. I know I'm kind of getting off track and meandering. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, and so just to address that, once and for all, so Guru and I, when we first discussed the format of the podcast, this information is out there in a lot of different places. Not all of them are PSP, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's the conversational tone, and it's the little nuggets that come as an adjunct to what we're talking about if we're being focused and good, that are often worth a lot. And the other thing is we looked at the worst case scenario, and somebody absolutely hates what we do, in which case they're welcome to demand a full refund and start their own podcast with the proceeds.
There we go. So, referring back to those early educational specialists, I think we do a good job. Now, as an educator right now, what I have to do when I work with teachers is I have to ask them 4 very important questions, and they're very simple in regards to teaching and learning. And I have to ask myself this every time I do something in regards to PSP or instruction, just period, is I ask myself, the first question is, what do I want this person to learn? What's the walk away from this? What's the takeaway? The second question is, how will I know when they've learned it? What do I use to establish mastery? And those 2 are pretty easy questions. The third and the fourth question tend to get a little bit more complicated and difficult. The third question would be, what do I do if they don't know anything? And then a fourth question, which is equally difficult, is what do I do if they already know it? So the first one is, what do I want them to do? Like, well, I want them to get, some ability, some confidence, some ability to improve their ability to survive in a violent conflict. How will I know when they do it? When I punch them, they dodge. Now, the third and the fourth, what am I going to do if they don't know it? So if they don't even know how to hold a fist, what kind of remediation am I going to offer? And the fourth piece, what do I know? What am I going to do if they already know it, which is an enrichment piece? How am I going to extend that learning because they're hungry? So I'd like to reference last night. I had this epiphany teaching a class where I had 2 different students. One was struggling, and that's okay, but the other one was naturally getting it. So thankfully, PSP is so rich and deep that I can just go off task if I need to, that this one person was asking me questions. What happens here, like the what if game, but in a genuine way, not to challenge me. She was doing a foot entry, but noticing her knee was striking me. And so that sparked a whole new enrichment piece that would answer that fourth question. What do I do if they're already there and where they know it? But then I had to flip the switch and go back to the one who wasn't really confident and very physical adept. What do I do if they don't know it? So I had to kind of wire their physical attributes. I really focus on the physical attributes with one while really extending the mental attributes of the other. So those are all considerations when you teach, that you're not going to teach a hodgepodge cookie cutter kind of element. You've got multiple levels of skill and learning that we're going to have to address, which is frustrating, but also very rewarding and satisfying when you accomplish it.
Well, it definitely stretches you as a teacher.
Yeah, it does. It puts you on notice. But another beauty of, from a teaching standpoint of PSP, is that it is such a rich, developed system, in that you can pull from a lot of things. Well, for instance, our last couple of seminars that you've hosted down here, the chicken kick, the sipak ayam, has shown up everywhere, and we could probably work a seminar just on that, because it's such an adaptable, or Silat in itself is such an adaptable, rich type of style or system, whatever you want to qualify it as. It answers a lot of questions, and if your students are asking that question, we have the ability and knowledge and context to show them, and the light bulbs go off continuously.
Yeah, that's this past Monday we were doing Purukapala, which is a throw we have in here for people not familiar with PSP or Silat in general, or Southeast Asian systems. I've seen it crop up a lot of different places. But I was using chicken kick as kind of like an unsticker. When somebody started to resist, and I looked over and I was like, and chicken kick is everywhere, and then I forgot that I was not looking at anybody who went to that seminar, so the in joke was just totally over the head.
Yeah, totally, because it is everywhere, and that's the humor is so powerful, is that any technique can be everywhere in Silat, and it's like that epiphany that the heavens part and the angels sing, and you get that halo of light around you when you finally understand it. And I think what differentiates PSP from other systems, and again, I'm not speaking to other systems because I've not experienced them. I just know PSP is my expression, is that I experience that routinely and faster in PSP than I have other places. And again, I'm not criticizing anybody. It just happened to be I was at PSP in the right time, in the right setting to experience that. Because it's all genetic and body history and whatever we bring to the table that kind of determines our success. So yeah, but it's been an interesting trail because we have to explain what is Pencak Silat, and it's not very easy because it addresses so many things. Because there's the stand-up component, there's the ground harima component, and then we have to talk about how every movement could be used with a weapon because there's no Silat without knife and no knife without Silat. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
It's an interesting what-if game in instruction because the amount of information that, even though we're simplifying it right now, the amount of information that we're responsible for is kind of vast. And the hard part is figuring out what to leave out right now. So.
Absolutely. Well, and that kind of speaks to the streams and how things are organized right now. But we're coming up on almost an hour here. And
oh, really?
Probably a little bit less once we clean it up.
Do you want to talk about evolution real quick?
Yeah, sure.
So you had mentioned earlier that we are part of version 2.0, or the second iteration. So at that point in time, when we first started getting introduced to it, from my experience, my opinion, we were still kind of very traditional, that we were drawing a lot of movement from some very artistic movement that was very indicative of Southeast Asian martial arts, specifically Silat. You mentioned Puder Kapala earlier, which is that's kind of a Silat signature, you know what I mean? And it was still very combat effective, but we also kind of developed our artistic expression there. From what I'm seeing is that we're transitioning. We're not moving away from it because we still can do it when called upon, and we still will do it if a student is interested. Is that we're transitioning from a more traditional artistic approach to a very combat centered, and it's always been combat centered, but it's in your face. There's no doubt about it. What we're doing is for combat, and even though yourself, myself, some of the older guys in the systems will still do some of these exercises that are very poetic and dance-like. The major meat of instruction right now that we disseminate to people is in your face. We're going to take care of what we need to take care of, and it's going to be combat, and we're going to walk away. We're going to be able to walk away from the conflict. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and that's part of a long-running conversation. Granted, it's only been running for about 8 months at this point, maybe 9, that I've had with Guru is the conversations you have these days with people about martial arts, about self-defense, are shorter than they have been, in the past. You don't get somebody walking in the door who's like, hey, I'm going to give you 12 years of my time.
Right.
With the proliferation of stuff that's out there, now it's, hey, you get me for a seminar and you might get me to come to a training group if the seminar doesn't suck. But if I don't see anything that blows my skirt up, I may walk out in the middle of it. And that, it's not, I don't make a moral judgment about that. Not a good thing, not a bad thing, just a thing. It's no more moral than gravity. It just exists. But, with the combative aspect, the conversation, I don't know if your experiences mirrored up or where you're at, but the conversation I've had with a couple people, why do you do that flowery stuff? Well, that's part of how I'm beating up on you right now.
Yeah, there's a hypnotic piece to it that I've witnessed, but I still enjoy it, but I don't teach it because that's not the way that the system is set up now. However, in my long-term goal, if somebody cruises through the system with some diligence, of course, but if they get through the system of what I can teach them, is then I'm going to try to develop that artistic side because it's hypnotic. I can remember going to work the day after on a Wednesday from a Tuesday night when Guru's dancing, and all of a sudden his big ham fist hits me square in the eyes, and I got raccoon black eyes. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's very powerful. In my opinion, but what we have to get out to the masses, I think, right now, which is something they can wrap their head around because they have to be comfortable in their investment, is that can I apply this in the street in a fast way? And another beauty of PSP or Silat in general is that it was traditionally learned from my conversations with Guru in about 90 days, but they were consecutive days that you would go train with a Pendekar or a Guru or a Pindiri for 90 days straight. So you got 3 months and you got a system. Mm-hmm. Now, most of these systems are very simplified, and this is in a culture in Indonesia where people were dying left and right and where you could buy the farm pretty quickly. So it had to be something that was digestible and transferable within a short amount of time. Now, we don't have that kind of luxury. So I think the simplifying I don't want to say removal of the poetic motion, the bunga before the bua, or the fruit in front of the flower, which is an Indonesian saying, is something we're going to move away from, because I can always remember thinking I was hot shit, or I just learned something and I was going to get something by Guru, and then after I woke up, after I tried it, I would remember that he may have shown me everything I know, but he hasn't shown me everything he knows. You know if that makes sense?
Yeah.
So, and it would traditionally be a baiting movement, a sikap pasang, or some sort of like plate dance, whatever, sila plate dance or whatever that I would pay attention to, that then I would get blinded by, or like, oh, butterfly, and then bam, just housed. So I think the artistic expression is very important after we address the combative, because it kind of expands your creativity with what you want to try to do and what you want to apply.
That's interesting, and it's funny not having a specific conversation about the episodes that are in the can as of when this is being recorded. It's funny you mentioned some of those things. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, it's all cyclical. I think we all got our heads straight, and heads on a swivel in regards to what combat is, and we know good combat, we know good practice, and we know we can smell bullshit. We have a pretty good bullshit indicator, just with everybody who works within the group, because we know just by seeing that's probably not going to work. And then when we know a Guru, we're like, I really don't want to try anything on him right now. Yeah. So and we've learned that the hard way. But yeah, in regards to learning, I think what the evolution is, we've gone from, and it was always combative, don't get me wrong. It was always very combative. But it was very confusing to the layperson who really wasn't into some really esoteric movements in martial arts. I think we found it, and if I'm speaking out of turn of view, please correct me, is that I think we found it mysterious, fascinating, and a whole new way to look at things that we haven't seen before. And it evolved into a form of expression that was very fun, that was very useful, and it was just different in a good way. And I've always enjoyed that it's been different in a good way, not just for different sake. Don't get me wrong, is because I want to do monkey kung fu forever, but that just didn't happen, and this came in the form of expression that has been allowed to me by PSP and Silat in general. It's been a wonderful experience. It's been very rewarding. Because I feel very confident that I can protect myself and at least make it to the emergency room in a given conflict up to a certain amount of variables, and that I feel very confident that I can protect my loved ones, to the point that they can escape because of PSP, because of the things that I've been forced to do, the productive struggle, the creative exploration, the adaptation that you mentioned earlier. So I think all those come together, it really make Silat, and specifically PSP, a really unique system and something really worthwhile to pursue.
Definitely, I'd agree with that. And yeah, My journey into it will probably save for an interview. We debated interviewing me, and I asked her why anybody would want to be that bored. But there are some interesting stories there, so one of these days.
Yeah, like you said, the nuggets, man, because I think there's a common thing that you just mentioned. There's some central ideas that keep reoccurring regardless of the agenda of the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That make PSP unique.
So combative truth is pretty much, it is, regardless of who you are.
Right.
So when you look at it, you're right, it is cyclical. But I'd love to do another interview with you at some point in the future, Bill, and have you back on, and maybe if we can get froggy with the technology, maybe even look at some like a roundtable discussion.
Yeah, that'd work. That'd be great.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for your time, Bill, and thanks for everybody for tuning into this episode of PSP. Our next interview up should be this guy Hugo that you keep on hearing getting referenced so often.
Mythical legendary status.
Yes, a monster from the depths of the pit that survives mostly on Camel non-filtered cigarettes and Kessler whiskey. So definitely don't miss that one. Thanks.
That's
everybody.
it.
All right.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Stepping from Stone to Stone. To find out more about us, please visit us online at silat.us, that's silat.us, or combat-silat.net. You can also find us on YouTube at Silat Junkie 1, or you can find us on Facebook by simply searching for Pencak Silat Pertempuran. Thanks again for listening to another episode of Stepping from Stone to Stone.